Welcome, brothers, sisters, fellow travelers. My name is Joel and this is Good Crazy. I want to talk a little about hell and hellfire, because that can be one of the hardest things to believe for Christians, but it's considered to be part of the typical teachings of Christianity. But not all Christians believe in an actual place of eternal damnation. They don't believe in a literal hellfire. And what's hard is so many people talk about these things with certainty. They're either certain that hell does exist, it's a literal place of torment, or they're certain that it doesn't exist. And I can only speak for myself and say that I haven't died. I don't know in detail what the afterlife is like, and I don't claim to be certain about things like that. But I don't have to be certain to kind of consider the possibilities and make a determination based on my conscience what side of the issue I would like to be on. And so I want to share some of those thoughts with you. Maybe they can help you. Maybe you too find the idea of a place of eternal damnation to be hard to swallow, but you don't know how to back that belief up with a particular reason why. And so maybe I can help with that. First of all, if you believe and base your beliefs on the Bible, let's talk about how much the Bible talks about hellfire. And it is very, very little. You would think that it would be something really important to talk about. Maybe there would be whole chapters or books dedicated to what hell is like, but there aren't. In fact, the entire so-called Old Testament, which is about 75% of the Bible, doesn't mention that at all. And so if you go to a religious Jewish person today and ask them if they believe in eternal damnation, they will almost certainly tell you no, because it is not commonly believed by religious Jewish people that God tortures people forever. It's more of a Christian belief. Where did that come from? Because when God talks to Adam, for instance, about disobedience, he doesn't mention hellfire as a consequence. He says, dust you are, and to dust you will return. And so if we just based our beliefs on that, there would be no reason to believe that. But we have in the teachings of Jesus a few references. There's also in Revelation, the book of Revelation, there are some references to a lake of fire. But to be fair, Revelation is a book filled with symbolism, right? There are seven-headed beasts and dragons and all kinds of other things that are, I would say, clearly meant to be interpreted symbolically. And if we look to Jesus and the few references that he has to it, where he talks about, for instance, a fiery Gehenna, and he mentions things like worm that doesn't die and the fire that doesn't go out. Well, we have to remember that Jesus, too, almost exclusively talked in symbolic language. It said that when he spoke to the crowds, he would not speak to them without a parable. That is to say, a teaching that had, a story with symbolic meaning. And so when he talks about Gehenna, he doesn't use the word Hades, but Gehenna, he refers to what's the Valley of Hinnom, which was a garbage dump near Jerusalem, and calls it this fiery Gehenna. It's entirely possible that he was using that in a symbolic way. He said also, he that doesn't drink my blood and eat my flesh has no part in me. And many people who heard him say that thought he meant that literally, and they were like, who can listen to this? This is terrible. But it was clearly meant symbolically, right? Because the apostles ate bread and drank wine that symbolized those things, but they didn't actually cannibalize Jesus. He was speaking in symbolic language. And so we come to the fact that although in the Bible there are almost no references to a place of fiery torment, there are a few, but they are possibly meant to be understood symbolically, maybe referring to eternal destruction, a fire that doesn't go out in the sense that it's a destruction from which someone cannot return. It's a possibility. So what are we supposed to do with that when there are possibilities? Well, we have to let our conscience, our heart, guide us, right? Because if we believe that God, our Father and Creator, is a God of love, then it's hard to believe that someone, even if they were like Adolf Hitler, someone that is responsible for the death of billions of people, and maybe they lived, 120 years or so. They live the most that any human can live, but that they should be punished for that for all eternity, not just millions of years, billions of years, trillions of years. No, for all eternity. That makes sense to some people, I suppose. But to me, in my conscience, that doesn't feel right. There are certainly people who've done horrible things, but to wish that not only should they pay for their crimes for one lifetime or millions of lifetimes, but billions and beyond, it doesn't seem like that fits with the idea of a God of love. And I would also say, are we supposed to be judged based on what we believe or on our actions, right? Our actions are what matter. Someone can believe in hellfire and do all kinds of horrible things, and they won't be rewarded because they believed in hellfire. What they will be judged for are the actions that they did during their lifetime, while someone else may not believe in hellfire and live a saintly life. And the idea that God will then punish them because they didn't believe in hellfire, even though every action of their life was kind, it doesn't seem to fit with the idea of a God of love. So the question becomes to me, why are people so hell bent, if you will, on believing in hellfire? What is it about that teaching that resonates so strongly with them? And I would say that it's because of fear, right? Because fear itself is unfortunately a great motivator. And oftentimes people who can't find the basis in love for what they're going to choose to do can inspire themselves out of fear to do what they believe is right. You may be familiar with Pascal's wager, where Blaise Pascal had a thought experiment where he basically says, well, we can't know what happens after death. But if you live your life in a godly manner, as if hell is a possibility, you're better off, right? Because it means infinite blessings, infinite goodness after you die for just making a few minor changes in your life while you live versus not believing in hellfire and living whatever life you want to and potentially being tortured eternally as a result. And I mean no disrespect to Blaise Pascal. He's clearly an incredibly intelligent person. But I find a flaw in that reasoning is that the basis of it is fear. Because I don't think that a God of love wants to be worshiped or revered or loved out of fear. You know, for us to do what we believe God wants of us out of fear rather than love seems to miss the very point of everything, which is that we shouldn't have to be told not to murder, not to steal, and only do it because we're afraid of the consequences of those actions, but rather to see that us being asked not to murder is something done out of love. I just think, imagine if when you die and you're before God and you can say, I didn't believe that you tortured people forever and ever. I was kind to other people because I believed that was the best way of living, because I love who Jesus is as a person and I wanted to imitate his example, not because I was afraid of what was going to happen to me, but because I loved that idea and I wanted to live that way. And so I can completely understand why some people believe that if they're going to get their children to act in a certain way, they've got to motivate them with fear. I understand why they might feel that that's the easy option to make your children afraid or make others afraid of what could happen. But it isn't it a much better option to motivate them out of love, to have them realize that the reason we live our lives this way is not because we're afraid. It's because we love being kind to other people. And we love the idea of living in a world where that kindness reverberates out and causes other people to return that same kindness. And so I would say it's not really about whether the Bible talks about a literal hellfire or whether we think that's a logical conclusion. It's more about connecting with our hearts, our consciousness, our conscience, and thinking about why we do the things that we do and letting it be not a motivation of fear, but motivated out of love with a full trust and faith that God will reward those who are loving in spite of the situation that they live in spite of the difficulties they go through in life. And so, if I could leave you with any point in particular, it would be that I don't know what happens after we die, but I highly encourage you to believe in a true God of love who doesn't have to threaten us with punishment, but rather motivates us with love. Until next time, may you know love, may you have peace, and may the truth set you free.